What you are looking at now is absolute void or universe at 0 second. Now, this absolute void space or universe at 0 second, it has properties. The main properties of this kind of space that it has absolute zero temperature, since it is completely devoid of everything, like not even heat radiation, electromagnetic radiation, particles are present in this kind of space. The absolute zero temperature is achieved naturally. This kind of space, it also has dimensions. It has the spatial dimensions x, y, z. However, if the absolute void space was only consistent of this kind of these three spatial dimensions, it meant that the particles would not be created and the absolute void would remain as the only entity in the universe. Therefore, one more dimension is needed for the whole equations to be completed. Like here, we need a factor of change. Like what is the factor of change that will make the absolute void becoming the would make the absolute void becoming particles and so far like that. You might be wondering, like, usually we heard of that time is our factor of change. Our time is the four dimensions. Here, according to our definition of time, time is a hypothetical concept. Like it represents changes during a certain event comparing to constant change rate events. Therefore, time itself is not the four dimension, even though that time does exist, but as a factor of change. So what we did was using in through this experiment, we tried to study the properties of absolute void through creating a void inside a closed head strings. Like here, the entity that was developed inside the syringe, like the entity that was resisting the creation of void, we called it the void resistant. Here we are defining the void resistant as the fourth dimension in the absolute void space. But the void resistant has patterns. Like its patterns is different from a system to another system. Usually we have two kind of systems. If the absolute void is in a confined system, it has a void resistance that tends to crush the system. And if the absolute void is in an open system, it has a void resistance that tends to open the system. Now, every point from the confined system acts as a void in an open system, where the void resistant is acting outward. Here, we can see that the absolute void had a fourth dimension. Here, the void resistant is our factor of change, or the fourth dimension. Now, we will take a cross sections of universe at 0 second. We will see that every point of this kind of space was consisting of x, y, z, and the fourth dimension, which is the factor of change or the void resistant. But since the universe at 0 second was an open system, the void resistant was acting outward. Now the void resistant, with the increase of the spatial dimensions, it increases. However, there is a limit. When the limit is reached, the void resistant will be at its maximum level of instability, like at radius 8.7713 by 10.8 meter, the system will be reaching its maximum level of stability. The only way for the system to achieve equilibrium is to collapse inward, like this. Now, after the system had collapsed, we can see the first particle was created, and this particle is being managed by two void resistance, the internal void resistant and the external void resistant. The system will continue collapsing until the internal and the void resistant and the external void resistant are equal. The internal void resistant tends to make the system collapsing, while the external void resistance is the resistant entity. Now again we return to the cross section of the universe at 0 second, or the absolute void space. Now it all collapsed, creating particles simultaneously everywhere. Now taking a hadron as an example, we will see that a neutron is a less stable hadron. where in the neutron we will see that the internal void resistance is greater than the external one. Therefore, the system will collapse, creating a proton. Here in a proton, we will have the proton field and the lepton field. Like here, the internal void resistance is equal to the external void resistance. And the internal void resistance acts as the proton field, and the external void resistance will act as the lepton field. Now we have hadron field, a lepton field, and finally the electromagnetic field as the free field that was created from the external void resistance. Here we have a level of equilibrium between the proton field and the lepton field. But for every of these three fields have its own quanta. We have the hadron quanta, lepton quanta, and electromagnetic field quanta. We have quarks, electrons, and the photons.